So Tim, thank you for coming on the pod. I really appreciate
Thanks for having me.
We always like to kick off with a bit about you.
Yeah.
So you obviously started in consultancy, moved into fintech, and then founded Yonder.
Yeah.
So maybe high level, walk us through that journey and what it looked like.
Yeah, I think my early days of starting companies, or the ideas started actually much earlier. My dad worked at Hewlett Packard for 20 plus years, and anyone who knows Hewlett Packard was the OG Silicon Valley company. And so when I was 4 or 5, I got to tinker with 386 computers, got to learn how to overclock them, and got exposed to a lot of tech giants as well in the early days. I got to read the biography of Bill Gates, of the HP founders, the IBM co-founders, and even the Sony co-founder as well. So kind of early on, I had a bit of a bug. I would say that sort of fast forward 10 or 15 years though, in Australia, there wasn't a huge startup scene, especially in Melbourne. And so you'd often just sort of take the most traditional path. And so I ended up spending a couple of years in consulting. One of my first ideas, funnily enough, though, was in 2011. And it was a bit of a I started dipping my toe into fintech, where as a frustrated consultant, one of the biggest banes of my existence was getting expenses, and you'd have to claim them back from the company. And the process was horrible. You'd basically pay on a corporate card, you'd get the receipt, you'd have to go into SAP, this horrible clunky system, input each expense one by one, put the receipts in an envelope, and then mail it off in this horrible yellow envelope, and then get it reimbursed. And I was like, what if you could build an app that you could that was linked to a card that you could basically automatically take a photo of your receipt, it would OCR the data in, and then essentially manage expenses on an app linked to a card.
And this is in 2011?
2011. And that's now Brex, Ramp, Payhawk, Playo, multi-billion-dollar companies. We were, I was too early, didn't have the ability to execute on that. But I already had some inklings in that board space.
How far did you get with that?
Not super far. I think the challenges was there were so many challenges. One, issuing a card in 2011 was really difficult. Secondly, mobile apps weren't that mature, and neither was OCR. So I would say right idea too early, and probably wrong ecosystem as well. I probably would have been better if I was living in the Bay Area, for example. So, I kind of had an itch. I had a couple of ideas since then. And then from consulting into fintech was actually a project I spent a year in Kenya working with some of the early founding team of a company and product called M-Pesa, which is a mobile money platform. And it's insane. I mean, this mobile money platform does about 50% of the Kenyan GDP.
Wow.
So just an insane level of, impact on society.
What stage did you join that?
Well, I was there more of a consulting project, but it was basically looking at how you can use that mobile payments platform for things around mobile healthcare training, looking at health insurance, looking at different ways you could use sort of the same sort of payment platform to do a bunch of other things on top of that as well. So, that company started in 2006, so way before sort of fintech was even a thing. But I think I kind of had a bit of an itch for this space post that, and so I moved to London, joined a scale-up called ClearScore, got to be part of that rocket ship journey, went through the process of it was getting acquired, didn't go through, never, was there when it was good navigating through COVID as well. I had a lot of fun. I met my 2 co-founders there as well.
Okay. And did you move to London for ClearScore? Were you thinking about fintech? It's big in London. I want to go there.
It was the latter actually.
Okay.
So I was thinking, okay, if I want to go and build a consumer fintech, by 2016, post Kenya, it was go back to Australia or go and do something different. And I'm I want to go and build something. And so it was basically, where's the best fintechs being built? And it was basically in my mind, New York, San Francisco, London, or Shenzhen, or one of the main major cities in China. China was tricky in that I think it was a super growth market, but my Chinese is terrible. And as a Chinese looking person, well, I look Chinese, so it's more challenging. And so I was pretty clear, if I was going to be in China, I would need to know fluent Chinese, and my Chinese was so bad. So I was okay, I'll probably end up in a Western market. And so it was sort of between London and or New York, San Francisco, and sort of ended up in London in the end. So, but yeah, the primary goal was go and be immersed in the ecosystem, go join a scale up, learn, and then one day go start my own thing. And so I would say to an extent, it was a grand plan to the extent of the sequencing of the things I wanted to do. It wasn't grand in that I wasn't sure what it would look like, and it wasn't grand plan. It didn't have exact dates. It was more just very broadly, I'd like to go build some stuff. I'd like to go be part of a great ecosystem. And London just felt like a great place to be.
And you did it. That's the main thing. You took that jump, and then you met your co-founders, you said.
Yep. Yeah.
And then Yonder in 2020.
Yeah, 2021 was when we started building it, and then we launched publicly in mid 2022.
Okay.
So Harry, my co-founder and CTO, he was the first engineer I worked with at ClearScale.
Wow.
So I was literally like week 1, week 2, and I was working on a product feature, and I said, which engineer should I work with? They're like, oh, go and talk to Harry. And so it's been now almost 7 years we've worked together now, 7, 8 years.
Wow. And then your third co-founder.
Yeah, Thiso. So we worked together at ClearScale as well. He was on the data science team, and he's from Australia actually. So we spent a lot of time talking about what it was like moving over. Would we move back? We actually joked at one point, would we start a fintech in Australia? We obviously decided not to do that, but we'd actually talked about it even at lunch, being like, oh, it'd be kind of cool one day to like work on something, maybe work on something in Australia. We ultimately concluded Australia wasn't the best market, at least, and London was a better market, but actually fast forward, we ended up building something together.
Yeah, and then so that journey from when you started something to now, what's changed the most and what stayed the same, whether that be your mission versus the product? Like, what does that evolution look like as a company?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is you go from building product to building a business to then building an organization. That's probably one of the biggest transitions I've noticed in that at different stages of the company. At the very start, I'm a product person by background. Your business is the product. And so you have one simple goal, find product market fit. And so the entirety of how you think about everything is about finding product market fit. And so it's really a product building exercise. And then I think you then now just start thinking about, okay, it's a great product, but you ultimately need to figure out how the business is going to work. And so then you go to building a business. And so you're thinking about like your monetization, you're thinking about your unit economics, you're thinking about like how might this scale? So it's more of like a business problem. And then I think you go into like building an organization, which is like, who are the right management team I need in place? Who is the right where do I need to have the right org structure? How do I set up the org structure? And really like, how do I get stuff done through team is like the big change. And so that's probably the biggest transition. And I would say that the way to describe from like early days to later stage, the work is less enjoyable, but more rewarding. What I mean by that, the early like excitement of like getting your first customer or, having your product in the wild, you cannot replace that. There is something like so raw about, the first card transaction was like, whoa, this is like, we built this with like 10 people in this tiny charity workspace.
And when was that?
That was like 2021, end of 2021. It then took a while to get it like a market that we could actually take to market. We had to get FCA license as well. So there's a bit of delay from when we could like do a test transaction to actually get it to customers. To then now, there's a lot more expectations now, right? Like we've got to hit revenue targets, we've got to grow, we've got customer support, we've got like way more like scaling considerations. So I'd say like less enjoyable day to day, but way more rewarding, right? Like the idea that you could serve like tens of thousands of customers, we've now done more than £500 million of spend through our card. That's super rewarding. Or to be able to like meet the partners we work with and them saying, hey, you really helped grow and accelerate our business. That's so rewarding. So I describe it as like less fun, more rewarding, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. You have more impact now because you've almost built those building blocks early on. That was the fun bit. And it's still enjoyable, but now you get reaping the benefits of that, I guess.
Exactly. And I think just when you're bigger, more problems, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have customers, well, no customer support problems. But now customer support problems. No, small team, no team problems. Bigger team, more team problems. So there's a lot more like problems you have to deal with. But I think to be able to be like, we built this, and to see the impact, that's extraordinary. Yeah. That's such a cool feeling.
Yeah.
And going back to your point around like the mission side, I think, our mission is to empower people to build financially rewarding lives. And to be able to see that mission start to come to life is super, super satisfying.
And then as a founder, obviously wear many, many hats, but you sound like you're more on the product side. Would you say you still lean towards being more of a product-focused founder, or as you've gone from product to business to team or organization, that's changed a bit?
It's definitely changed in that I'm definitely less hands-on day-to-day, but I will still have a strong opinion on product. And I will occasionally be like, this isn't good enough. I think we need to do better. But I would say that, what I need to make sure I do is do things that only I can do. So when I think about that, it's like market-facing things, whether it's facing investors, key suppliers, key, investor, so PR relationships. So like there's certain things that only I can do that no one else can do. So I need to make sure, one, I'm doing that. The second aspect of my job that I have to do that no one else can do is set culture, continue to keep us focused on mission, build a great team, recruit the best talent. So it's like, that's another thing that no one else can do that I can do. So then I always have to kind of like think about what are things that only I can do that no one else can do. And then the third thing is like, what are things that I enjoy doing? Because if I just do 1 and 2, then yes, I'll be doing the most highest leverage thing, but then I won't have joy in my work. And so I always try and make sure that I have, 10-20% of my time working on things that I just love doing, which is building. I love building. And so making sure I have time to build, even in a very small capacity, and, look at product, work on product, look at some of the data, read customer support feedback. That gives me joy. And so I want to make sure that I spend a good chunk of my time doing that, even if it's 10 to 20%, because that gives me joy and gets me excited to get out of bed every day as well.
How meticulous are you about that split?
I wouldn't say I'm like a ruthless, but I can generally get a sense sort of what I do every month is I sort of put together like key priorities, things that I need to get done for the organization. And they will typically map to like one of these broad categories. I wouldn't say like religious where I track every single minute. I don't know. I think it's a bit too clunky. And also I think it's just a season thing, right? There are periods where I need to spend more time on organization, more time on investors, or more time on like building our own product. So I think it adjusts, but I think I get a sort of an intuition to be like, hey, I'm spending on too many things I don't like doing, or I'm spending on too many things that aren't creating leverage for the company. So I should be focusing my time on that.
That's what I was going to, so there's obviously some things that only you can do, but maybe it doesn't move the needle in the biggest way. So how do you balance that where it's prioritizing only I can do this, but it moves the needle, or it doesn't move the needle?
I would say that if only I can do it, there's only things that can move the, like, if that makes sense. Like I wouldn't do it if it doesn't move the needle.
Yeah.
I can't even think of an example of something that only I can do that doesn't move the needle in a big way. For example, one of our biggest cost line items is our debt financing. That's a huge part of our business. And so that's really, really important. And so I will spend time making sure we get the right commercial deals in place, or the deals we have with like our network partners. Those are very big multi-million dollar pound deals. So I'll spend time doing those. Okay. Or any equity raise conversations. These are very big, important conversations. So I think like they all fit into that. And then in terms of, if I meet with any of our key partners, there'll really be ones where we've got a super high amount of spend with them. And therefore that relationship's a really important one. Okay. Anything outside of that, I won't spend time on, and I'll tell someone else to do. Okay.
It's quite a good segue. You mentioned culture.
Yep.
So how intentional, or what is culture in your opinion? How intentional are you about setting it?
I think culture is, the way I think about it is two things. One is, what are the rules that are unwritten? Or maybe less unwritten, like what are the rules of how we do things? And when I think about that, organizations are pretty weird in that in a friendship group, you hang around people like you. In an organization, you probably won't necessarily be friends with everyone there. And by very nature, you are like very different people. And so like culture is almost as the glue that sticks everyone together. But it feels a little bit artificial and a bit abstract. And that's actually by design, because organizations are very artificial. Like they're not family, they're not friends. They are like putting a bunch of people together and being like, we need to deliver this outcome. So I think that firstly, it's sort of like the value system and what you value over something else. And I think for me, culture has to be a decision to do X over Y. Otherwise, it's meaningless. Like, for example, be ethical. For me, it's not a cultural value. That's just something that everyone should have. That doesn't help you make a trade-off choice. One of our values is like to move quick and learn, which is like, hey, we want to move quick, make mistakes, and learn really quickly. The trade-off choice we're making is we will happily make more mistakes than most organizations. That's the explicit trade-off choice. Or acting like an owner is an explicit trade-off choice, which is no decisions by collaboration, no stakeholder management, almost nothing by committee unless it's an irreversible decision. It's single, directly responsible individual who has the full autonomy to make that decision. That has trade-offs though, in that you might annoy other teams because you will make a decision without thinking about them. So for me, like it has to be an explicit trade-off. And the second thing is really like actions. Like what do people actually do? And culture ultimately for me is reflected on what do people do? Because you can say a bunch of things, but ultimately what they do reflects culture. And in the same way, when people talk about strategy, I say strategy is really about resource allocation, and it's about what do people spend time doing. That's what really strategy is. And same with culture. It's what do people do?
So essentially, sort of baking culture in action in the terms of like, you're going to choose to do this over this, and you're going to approach it in this way. So speed over mistakes, for example.
Yeah.
Okay. And what people thrive in that culture? And what do you look for when you're hiring?
I think that what we have found is that people love the idea of ownership on paper. In practice, it means that you need to make judgment calls. It means that you need to go above and beyond, i.e. like, and I say that really simply, like, don't miss your deadline, which means if you need to work the weekend, you need to work the evening, you're an owner, get it done. So like, it's a double-edged sword, right? People want to be an owner, but not be responsible for pushing the team, working long hours, getting it out. When it blows up and goes bad, you fix it. By the way, if it doesn't deliver the outcome, you're accountable. So I just had a PM who just joined us last week. And one of the things I said to him very clearly was like, I will ultimately measure you on the outcomes you deliver. I don't care if you say all the right things and write the right strategy. If you don't deliver the product outcome, you haven't succeeded. And that is from day one. That is how I will hold you to account. And people don't like that because you can work really hard, and if you don't deliver the outcome, you haven't succeeded. That's just plain and simple. And so I think that's hard for people to really grasp. I think people love the idea of, I want to be part of a really great team. I want to be part of an A team. What is the cost of that? The cost of that is, it means that if you're not delivering the performance we expect of you, it means we will ask you to leave very early. That's tough.
Have you had to do that?
Plenty of times. And I think that I would say that culture, to an extent, is the average of your team, and actually overweighted by the people who aren't lifting the bar. And so, we will say, hey, you're great, but you're not great at this organization. And that's tough because on paper, and in most places, they will be fine. But I'm like, you're not lifting the bar of this organization. So even what we call, what typically people call like performance reviews, we call bar raising conversations, because it's really about how do we raise the bar for people. And even that name, bar raising, has a connotation versus performance review. This is about how do we lift your bar, how do we lift your bar, how do we lift your bar. It's pretty relentless, and not everyone should be there. And so I think that where we've made mistakes is when we've tried to be too accommodating for everyone. I think we did that probably a year, maybe in the last, there's probably a section of about a year, where I think as we're trying to scale, we were trying to make our company attractive to work at. And that was great, but I think we didn't necessarily do a good job of saying, hey, this may not be right for you. And therefore, this may not be a place you should join.
So 2 questions. How do you think people can grow or evolve into that? Maybe they don't start like that, but they become an owner with time. And then even before that, I guess, how do you uncover that or like find that out in the interview process?
I think to an extent it's innate in the sense of you either really care or you don't. Like if you want to go in and do clock in your hours and clock out, do not come to Yonder. And I tell that explicitly, Yonder is not the place for you. Yonder is a place where you go, I want to feel like I own a problem and I own space end to end and deliver on that. And that might mean pushing harder. That will also mean, though, you get the satisfaction of when you deliver the result. You can celebrate that, right? I think to an extent it's innate in that, like, even in, let's take member support. An owner for me says, hey, this is the problem. We don't have a process for it, but we're going to find a way to solve this for you. We're going to go and fight for you and figure out a way to make this right. That for me is an owner. Let's call it someone who just wants to come and work. Well, they'll just be like, well, there's no process, so we can't help you. So for me, it cuts across the entire organization. Now, the scope of the problem will change and the scale will change depending on your experience and level, but the expectation doesn't change.
So do you think everyone needs to be an owner to join Yonder? Does that work? Can everyone be an owner in an organization?
Yes, but the scope would look different. I think that's the key thing. The scope of what they do will be different depending on the experience.
And how do you uncover that when you're interviewing people?
I think a really simple example. I remember interviewing someone in member support. She's been with us for the last 3+ years now, even more. And she worked at a retail store before that. And we asked her to talk about, a time where she went above and beyond. And she talked about this scenario where a couple were coming to this retail store. They didn't have the clothes to the size that they wanted. And so she was like, I will go and get on a tube and get it for you. And so she literally told them, give me an hour, I'll go get it for you. got on a tube, got to the other store, picked up the clothes, came back and bought the clothes for them. That's a retail store staff doing that. That for me is acting like an owner.
And again, the culture is again baked in action there because that's something she's done.
Done, yes.
Like the mum test.
If she talked about it, that's useful. But I'm like, yeah, but what did you do? Did you actually deliver that? And ultimately, did you deliver the result, which is you got a customer the product they wanted and you result in a happy customer? If yes, then you've shown the value. So I think that's sort of what we want to see. The other thing we also look at is like when we ask them about the problem they worked on, do they naturally think about where they could have done better, or they naturally just like high five, we've nailed it, and I am a legend, and any mistakes with someone else, and like that happens a lot, by the way. They won't take ownership for the mistakes they made, and I want Yonder to be a high mistake environment. Mistakes are the only way we learn, and years ago I got advice being like, Tim, you need to improve your judgment. And I'm like, how the hell do I improve my judgment? And someone else said, judgment is improved by trying things and making mistakes and learning from them. That's judgment. And so I want people to improve their judgment by trying things, making mistakes, and learning from them.
Got it. Let's move on to brand and positioning. How do you position Yonder as something distinct in the market versus legacy players like an Amex, for example?
I think actually we think about it even less about positioning against an Amex, but actually more about sort of neobanks. And there's a little common thread between all neobanks. They all have pretty similar colors. They're all like quite like orange, blue, purple. They typically end in an O. And they are really positioned around like faster, cheaper, more convenient. That's kind of like the core value proposition. I'd say like almost by design inoffensive. Like everything's just like safe. And that's by design. I think what we decided to be was like, what are brands that I love? And brands that I love are like incredible direct-to-consumer lifestyle brands like Aesop, Patagonia. And like what they represent is more than their clothes. It represents like a certain lifestyle. And so by design, we made sure that like we were very photography-led. We were even the font we use, even the color palette we used, a lot more sort of, less shouty, bold colors and more like, elegant. Like we like to use the word like elegant, beautiful. That's the kind of the feeling we want people to have, and aspirational in the branding we have. And so that goes across the imagery we use, the copy we use, the typography we use, even down to we recently did like an out of home campaign, and the agency was like, well, you can use AI imagery. And we were like, no, we don't need AI imagery. They're like, look, you can't tell the difference. And they, they did this sort of game, and we could like try and compare and guess which ones are AI. And I'm like, look, guys, it doesn't matter whether we know the difference. We know the difference. And what we want is to be an authentic brand, and that means our own photography, our own customers, in our own partner locations. So any out-of-home campaign we have is literally at our partner's restaurant, with our own customers, with our own team, with our own photography.
That's what I was going to say, because even your own team are in some of the out-of-home advertisements, and then your team will post about it, saying, that's me, I'm the girl on the tube.
Exactly. And like for us, that's a really important part of, yes, maybe people don't know that, but we know that. And for me, that's something that I want to instill, where I said, look, why are we cutting the corners here? Like, let's do something we're proud of. And so let's go get it done. And so, they're like, well, it takes time to get shoot. I'm like, guys, call up our partners, put a survey out for customers, get a photographer, and dead do it next week. And so within 2 days, we found a place, we found some customers, and we did the photography, and it looks great. I loved the photography from it. And so for me, that's like an important part of the culture and action of like, hey, be really proud of the work we do and just make it happen. Like, don't make excuses. Don't be like, well, we can't do that. Like, just make it happen.
And with the 1,000,001 things you have to do, why prioritize going that above and beyond for that specific out-of-home campaign? Why does that matter so much?
I think it's a big investment we're making financially, but also it's a really critical brand touch point for consumers. And so it matters to us. And I think that's something that I've been thinking a lot more about now is what can be measured. So what can't be measured sometimes needs to be measured in the sense of like, there are a bunch of things that, I can't really point to a P&L impact of it. And yet that's not why we should do it. We do it because it's just so core to who we are and what makes culture. And these things matter just as much as things that can be measured, like ARPU, NRR, ARR, monthly growth rate. Like these things are just as important. It's hard to keep them though, I acknowledge, because I think you've got priorities from, market, priorities from investors, priorities from, hey, XYZ did this level of growth. And so to an extent, you kind of get pulled that way. But I've almost kind of gone back to be like, build something you're proud of. That sounds so simple, but I do think there's something about build something you're proud of.
Definitely. And I think being a regulated company as well, if we look at the out-of-home campaigns that you did, something I really liked was the sort of compliant play on words, if you like. One example is your debit card is pointless, probably.
Yeah.
And because that plays on multiple strands. You've got the product side of, well, we offer points on your debit cards. You've got the probably as the kind of, it's not an absolute claim, these sorts of things. So how do you think about staying creative whilst remaining compliant as a regulated company?
It's hard. It's really hard. I think that what's great is that our reg team, legal and compliance team worked with the marketing team the whole way through. And we're quickly able to like highlight areas where like, look, I think that's going to land or that's not going to be compliant, but not be prescriptive on what we should say. Because I think the fastest way to like the kill the creative, like you can see them, right? Like you have this great copy and all of a sudden you have this giant T's and C's there which just kills the whole thing. And so we're like, almost how do we integrate the compliance lens into the creative process? Now the copy took forever to write, by the way. That like one piece of copy, I take zero credit for it, but the team came up with it. It took a lot of iterations to get there. But I think they have a healthy respect for having to think about, rules around, for advertising and rules around marketing a regulated product. So I think like they're not like stubborn and being like, no, we don't want to like think about that. I think they recognize that. And they're like, but how do we like be playful with it? Which is like the whole probably thing was like very playful way of doing it. And I think, again, it feels really on brand for us as well.
And practically, how do the teams do that?
I think there's this sort of three lens, right? One of them I think is, tooling helps. We obviously use your platform. That's helpful. I think the thing that matters even more so though is, and process is important, second thing. Yes, you need to have a FinPom process and all that. For me, it's actually just culture. Though that's really important is that you can have the first two, but if the teams don't feel like they're working together, then it doesn't matter how much process and tooling you have. It's just going to be like throw it over the fence and argue over our Slack back and forth. That's like not super helpful. What's super helpful is to be like, this is what we want to land. Yes, you've got concerns. What can we do to like make it land, but still make it fun? While also make sure we're like not breaching any financial promotion rules. Like working with them, and I think our legal compliance team do a great job of like working with the team. They're not like, no. I met a very senior banking executive and he goes, oh, the compliance team are the no team. And like that's even just the way he feels about them as the no team. And I don't feel like about that at all with our team. I actually genuinely feel like they are working in partnership with the team and like really trying to find a way, be like, look, we can't do it this way, but what if we do it this way? Or what about this? It's really like trying to work together. It's not perfect, I would say there's always more we could do, but I do think that there is a genuine sense of like, we want to try and make it work rather than being like, we don't care.
100%. It's something we see over and over again where compliance and legal are seen as the no function, the no department, but actually looping them in early, they actually have really interesting ideas because they see it through a different lens.
Yeah.
Do you find that your teams, like, they got to that conclusion naturally, or that was set by the culture? Like, how did that come about? Because it's not.
Oh, I think it was painful. Like, I think there was many years of just pain, to be honest. I think it helped that. No, it's a really tricky one. I think firstly that the other thing as well, and here's a really interesting way of describing it. The problem with most startups need to build solving for the 95% and ignoring the 5%. That's how you scale quickly. So you cut corners. The very job of regulation and compliance teams are to worry about the 5%. So you have like a really interesting like cultural challenge at that point of like, how do you bridge that gap? That's pretty like innate to how startups are built, and innate to reg and compliance teams are responsible for the 5%. And so that was hard because I think you have to be able to bridge that gap and knowing how to take a proportional approach, but also recognizing that their job is to worry about that 5%.
And what else about financial regulation and building a startup in a regulated sector have you learned beyond the sort of they care about the 5%?
I think that's one element. The second element is intent is important, but not good enough. It has to be documented somewhere. And so we try and build documentation as part of our culture and how we work in general. And so it's just like as part of your thinking process, document, but also having to think about how is this going to be used in the eyes of a regulatory review, thinking about that. So it's like a different muscle to build as well. I think even just definitions, for example, there's regulation around like a change to the product, and you should do some consumer duty analysis. But what's a change to the product? In a tech company, you change the product every day. So does that go through a consumer duty analysis every week? Like, that feels not proportional. Well, actually, in the eyes of the regulator, the way they define a product change is quite different, because for a big bank, changing a product might be like, creating an entirely new product or making a big adaptation to it, not necessarily changing the app design. So you gotta then start to create the different nuances. Whereas in tech world, product is tech product. So at what point does a tech product change then trigger it's a material change to the product? So it's a lot of that is actually quite interesting. We've had to navigate, and we're getting better to kind of define definitions around what kind of threshold does it trigger that. But also we've got to be really careful. You get threshold, then people will game the threshold, right? So there's this classic thing when I used to work at a big company many, many, many years ago. People will purposely try and avoid hitting a threshold to not trigger something else. So thresholds can be gamed. So now you think about incentives, and that just goes back to for me, thinking about organization building. You've got to think about these different things. They always say if you design an incentive, you will drive behavior. There was a really interesting story many, many years ago. I think it was when the British Empire were sort of in India and had an issue of too many snakes, and they were basically saying, look, in order to reduce the number of snakes, we'll pay you a bounty for basically killing a snake. It actually worked well, got rid of a lot of snakes. But what happened was people were like, wait a second, if I breed snakes and kill them, I'll make money. So people started breeding snakes and killing them. And it's an example of how incentives drive behavior. And it's a quite a funny one, but actually, you look across the board, the entire world is created by an incentive that was created to drive a certain behavior, but created a perverse behavior.
And do you translating that back into financial regulation, do you find that the regulators have a tough job because they're ultimately trying to encourage that behavior, but the incentives that they sort of offer to do that can create those negative consequences, which is maybe why they're so, can be slow moving? It
is very difficult. I recognize that policy decisions are, you're trying to solve this without breaking this. How do you cut that line? Very difficult. And the other problem is you can't predict the future. So you can put something out with the right intent, and then when it hits the real world, you're like, oh, that didn't work. Over time, I've really started to appreciate how difficult it is for those in government in the sense of setting policy decisions. It's really difficult. I think we can abstractly talk about how we would want to solve this over this, but how do you define that? That's the hard part. So, and you see that across the board, any policy decision, it's getting that right line, hard, really hard.
And just, again, thinking about this practically, when did you become regulated?
Start of 2022.
And was the plan always to become regulated?
Yeah, I think we knew that if we wanted to, part out our own destiny, we would need to have our own regulatory permissions. Ultimately, if you don't, then you're always going to be subversive to getting approval from someone else. We ultimately want to be able to, carve our own path out, and therefore it means holding our own permissions. And so we'll progressively get more over time. And part of that is it means that we can innovate, we can move at the pace of our own team, versus if you're using someone else's license where you're ultimately constrained by the speed of their team.
And how did you, it's an ongoing process it sounds like, but how did you find that process? Is there a lot of learnings, a lot of growth that the team and the company has to go through to hit those requirements to be a regulated company?
It was a bit different because when we first got regulated, we were a very small team. So I would say that the biggest learning for people who haven't come from regulated firms, it's a very different thing to think about. So we had someone recently join, came from a dating app. It's a very different consideration of hey, we have this thing called KYC that you have to do. This isn't an optional thing. we have to do like anti-money laundering screening. This isn't an optional thing. So I think that's one element. I think the second element is the way you write internally may be different to the way you need to write documents with a regulator. Like we use very informal language. You know, you don't want to be like, hey, regulator. Like you need to be like writing things formally. And so I think just being more thoughtful about that. You know, I think the thing, again, I recognize is that there are people, everyone are people. And so, you know, we could make someone's job easy or difficult. And so like make their job easy because ultimately they're trying to do something good for the system. Then they may not have all the tools still. And I think what's interesting is that like the regulators' tools, like they've got like a set of toolboxes, right? What they can't do is tell you what to do. What they do have is, so you have a set of that in their toolbox is like guidelines, which essentially like is a set of like regulation they release. It's a set of information they can release, a set of questions they can ask you. And then like the nuclear option is obviously legal action and, you know, regulatory intervention. But you know, those two are quite nuclear. The rest of the tools are basically like questions. Guidance and questions are really the tools. And so when they ask questions, I always have to put myself in their shoes being like, that is their tool to regulate. Questions and guidance. And then obviously they're not satisfied, then the more nuclear options. But that's sort of how they work. And so like, how do you make it as easy for them as possible to do their job? Because ultimately they're just trying to do their job.
Yeah. Okay. Transitioning into the final few questions. If you were going to give someone a piece of advice, they're starting their own fintech company, direct to consumer or B2B, what would it be?
I think that two observations. One is, I think the advice of first-time founders think about product, second-time founders think about distribution is really important. It's something that I've had to learn, that distribution matters probably more or just as much as product. I think the classic ones of if you have product market fit, you automatically get growth is a complete lie. Like Uber is an incredible product. They had to work on distribution. They got really good distribution. Like you can't think about them in isolation. So I think that's the first insight. And so B2B, that's obviously building out your sales motion, product-led growth, whatever that is. And if you're a consumer, thinking about, you know, customer acquisition channels, what's your growth engine. I think the second thing that I think we did well, and I would continue to tell people to do, is build the right team. And what I mean by that is, you know, our first 3 months, we built no product. We just focused on hiring. And I still have no regrets about doing that.
When you first started out, it was just 3 months of
hiring.
Okay.
And literally our first board meeting, we had built no product. We'd just been focused on finding the right people. And it felt counterintuitive, but on hindsight, it was the best thing we did. And I think the third thing is be careful of the decisions you make policy-wise. As in when I say like on everything, like because those decisions will live with you for the rest of the life of that company. And you can't go back. Like we made decisions around like annual leave and like different things that we probably should have been more thoughtful about that we made, and we should have probably thought about the implications longer term.
So policy-wise, as it relates to your team or becoming regulated, for example?
Everything, yeah. Like I think you don't realize how many decisions stick by you longer than you think. And it's very hard to undo them.
Okay.
So yeah, I think there were probably some decisions I would have made probably differently. Not massive, but probably a little bit differently earlier on.
Okay. Yeah. And then looking at sort of Yonder's the next 12 months, what are you excited about? What's coming? You recently launched in Edinburgh. And I think Amsterdam is the plan.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. In Q1 next year. Okay. So I think there are sort of three things that we're really excited about. One is expanding our geographic reach. So we're across the UK now. We've also opened up an office in Cardiff now. We're going to open up one in Netherlands and look to grow pretty quickly across Europe. So that's really exciting to be able to really build an international business. I think the second thing is really start to see our partnership flywheel really start to scale now. We're just starting to see so much growth, so much excitement build up with the partners we're bringing on. And I'm excited to see what we can do with them and really deepen that. And it's a key part of our value proposition. And then the third element is, you know, thinking about how we can serve our customers in entirely new ways with our product. We obviously launched a debit card, which has been really, really successful. And we start to see more natural pull from customers being like, I want more of this, I want more of this. And we're like, wow, what else can we do to really take this to the next level? So yeah, for me, like all really exciting new avenues now to accelerate the growth and expansion of our business. And so as part of that then comes with growing the team as well and having the privilege to see team members in our team grow, seeing our team scale, and being able to be a place for people where they can like be challenged, work really hard, work on exciting problems, and be proud of the work they do. That's a huge privilege, and I think that's something I would, never take for granted.
Just going back to product very quickly, because I am a Yonder user. I opened a debit card account, and then I thought I could also get a credit, but you go straight to credit. Is that a regulatory thing? Is that intentional not to have both?
What do you mean by that, sorry?
So I had a debit card, and then I went to get a credit card, both from Yonder.
Yep.
But I could only have one. That's what I found on the app.
Oh, it's a bit of just keeping the product simple for now.
Okay.
Yeah, we will probably move to a world where you can start to manage them separately. It's honestly product simplicity, because then you have to manage like different accounts and then a way to toggle between them, and so like that's a whole new. We actually weren't sure people wanted to do that when we first launched it, and now we're starting to see people want to do that. So it's a bit of a
do that.
Yeah. So it's actually more of like it's honestly just a practical thing rather than anything else.
How do you, just on that point, approach product then? Do you look at it through a lens of so much we could do, but we need to do this one core thing really well and really simply before we then build on top of that? Or how do you view that?
I think the thing I think about with product is like there is always more you can do. So sequencing is the most important. There are things that are must be there to deliver the value proposition, and so you must prioritize those. And everything else can be delivered as people are using the product, and you will learn so many new things that didn't really matter in the past. So give me an example, really practical thing that we didn't realize when we had only a credit card was your top-up time, how long it takes for your account to get topped up. For credit cards, it kind of doesn't really matter if it's like 30 seconds most times, but occasionally goes up to like 5 to 10 minutes because of, I don't know, money laundering checks or fraud checks. For debit customers, actually, that's really frustrating, because if they get their card declined at Tesco and they want to top it up at Tesco at the terminal and it takes 2 minutes, they are awkwardly waiting at Tesco. They need that done instantly. So that was like a whole bunch of new things we never would have foreseen as a problem. And so I think in my mind, by design, I actually think you don't know that until you're in market, and that's okay. And so there's that really classic like known knowns, unknown knowns, and for me, like there's a bunch of like unknown unknowns that you just don't know until you're in market. And so I think the fastest way to figure that out is to be in market.
And so it goes back to shipping quickly, speed, and then sequencing in the right way.
Exactly.
Cool. Final question. Is there anything you wish more people asked, or something I should have asked about Yonder, about your journey, anything like that?
I think that what people don't realize is that half this game is your own psychology. And it's your own psychology of continuing to, on one hand, be very realistic and paranoid, because anything could kill your business. And yet, on the other hand, live every day with optimism and belief that you can make it succeed. And you have to hold them both in tension. And that is very weird, because if you aren't paranoid, then you won't have the sort of vigilance to like be looking around the next corner. You won't have the, I always feel like we should be working harder. Like I've never felt like we ever work hard enough. And like, even if the team are working to the very like last needle, like I will always feel like we're not working hard enough. And you kind of want this like constant feeling of like paranoia and like we should push harder. This thing could like go bad at any point. So you need, on one hand, extreme paranoia, and yet you also need to have this sense of we can solve this problem. We can believe, we can solve anything. Because like if you live in the former, it's a very demotivating place to be, and you just won't get out of bed and you won't be able to like push through the hard challenges. And yet, on the other hand, if you're overly optimistic, you won't have the sort of vigilance that you need to build a great company. And Andy Grove wrote a great book called Only the Paranoid Survive. Like you need to have paranoia. And Jensen at NVIDIA is famously very paranoid. Like he's like, we've got to keep shipping. I've got to keep working on the next product. And yet, with a deep belief of like, we can build a really successful business. That's weird.
Do you lean one way or the other slightly?
I'd say I'm both I'm
in
both.
Equal measures.
I don't know. I think you hold them both at the same time. I wouldn't say it's like a one or the other. I think you hold them both. People describe me as probably a very positive person, but I'm always like, we've got to be watching out for this. We've got to be watching out for this. We've got to be watching out for this.
Do you lean on your co-founders for that as well, to balance each other out? Because I know I do.
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. But I think even at an individual level, like you don't want, you still need everyone to be paranoid. Like I need my entire management team to be paranoid. Like if they are complacent, because for me that means if they're not, they're complacent. I don't want complacent.
Something we saw at a talk, and you mentioned that your personal growth needs to outstrip the company's growth.
Yes.
And I guess that final point talks to that as well.
Yes. Oh, heck yeah.
Always grow.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I said, it's the way I think about it is like there's like a cycle. You said it never gets easier, you just get faster. And that's the way I describe startup building. It never gets easier, you just get faster.
Great.
That's what you should do.
Well, we're out of time, but Tim, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.